Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Headline Books Christmas Extravaganza session. Tonight, we are doing our second thriller night, and we have two award-winning Headline Books authors with us this evening. We have Rick Robinson and Don Helin, who are going to talk about all of their books. Each of them have several to talk to, so we will not be bored at all. So we are going to kick things off with Rick, and I will let you all know here that if you have questions or comments that you would like for our presenters to listen or answer, go ahead and type them into the comments section of this video, and we'll get to those towards the end. We'll also be posting links to all of their books if you would like to pick up a copy of any of them. Thank you both so much for joining us this evening. Go ahead and take it away, Rick.
Thank you very much, Ashley. First off, I want to say for those of you who are tuning in right now to see our friend Tony Hylton, Tony is somewhere in the Ethernet, out in the stratosphere, getting lost in the internet connection. So he may be joining us a little bit later. If not, if you were looking for Tony, he'll be joining us on some of the other ones. Normally you see me in this situation on Zoom into Books where I'm moderating a panel, but this time it's going to be kind of fun. Don Helin and I are going to be moderating each other, I think, here. We're the only two that were able to make it into the talk room today. So I'm going to start out by telling you a little bit about Don. And then we'll get a reading from Don that he can do, and then we'll talk a little bit about his style. Don, the greatest thing about Don is that Don is unabashedly proud to be a veteran. He served in Vietnam, he served at the Pentagon, and what is cool about his books is that he brings that, they say everybody should bring their voice into what it is they write about. And he has such a passion for the pride in which the service that he gave to our country, it comes through in his writing, and it comes through in what he does. I met Don, gosh, maybe one of the first or second book shows that I ever went to. Don and I were talking about this the other day. Don was at, and at the time, I can't remember if he had a publisher at that time or was looking for a new one or a second one or what it was. But we kind of hit it off. We went out and had a few cocktails along the way that evening, and then made our way back. And we met up again at Penn Writers about a year later. And that's when I introduced him to Kathy Tietz, who was the publisher of Headline Books. And Kathy said, "Well, what do you think about this guy?" And I said, I really dig his stuff. His writing really good. It's right on point. It's the type of gets just to the type of insider type of voice that I think that we do with our fiction here at Headline Books. And so Don was brought on as one of the fiction writers here at Headline Books, and he and I have been writing thrillers together now for, I shouldn't say together, we've been alongside each other now for, gosh, you've been here 8-9 years, 10 years probably, right, Don?
Yeah, no, I got, I think it was 2011.
11. Okay, so we're coming up on 10th anniversary right now. What are you going to read for us tonight? You're going to read from one of the books?
Yes, I sure am.
The latest one, right?
Yeah. As Rick had mentioned, I'm a career Army guy, and I spent almost 30 years in the service. And I was overseas in Vietnam, overseas in Germany. And then I spent almost 10 years in 3 tours in the Pentagon. And if you think that doesn't give you entree to some of the politics that goes on with the White House staff and with Congress, as you know, Rick, it really is an opportunity, and you kind of tuck some of this stuff away. And I wasn't really sure what I would do when I left the Army, but this knowledge that I had really helped me a lot. And what I did is I created a series hero in Zach Kelly. And Zach is an Army colonel that works for the President's National Security Advisor. And the security advisor has a small team who kind of helps him cut through the bureaucracy. As you know, there's a fair amount of bureaucracy there. Cuts through the bureaucracy and handles special assignments. It was kind of interesting I was fortunate, and actually where we met, Rick, was at we were on a panel together at International Thriller Writers.
That's where it was. That's exactly
Yeah,
right.
they were really so helpful to me. You know, they have a wonderful debut author program, and I came into their debut author program in 2009. I had published my first book, and then that publisher ended up canceling all their mass market line, and so I ended up without a publisher. But fortunately, it all worked out.
Now I remember that. I remember that
all
whole
worked
thing.
out.
I'd forgotten the first one was Thriller
Right.
Fest.
Yeah.
You know, that was always such a fun time because it would always allow those of us who were with indie publishers or smaller publishers to mingle with some of the great writers. I mean, and they were such nice people to actually, you know, you sit there and you get to have a one-on-one conversation with somebody like Harlan Coben or David Baldacci or something of that.
All those guys are more than happy to have a beer with you at the bar or to have a cup of coffee with you. Either way you like to do it.
Most of them were more happy to have the beer, as I remember. I tell my wife it's discovering my inner Hemingway when I have too much when I'm drinking, but she just says I like to drink, so I'm not sure what that is.
We were so lucky because when I was a debut author, the mentor for our group was Lee Childs. And that's where I got the idea for having a series character. And I asked him, I said, Lee, how do you keep it interesting? And he said, you know, as you all know, his character travels very light, doesn't have a lot of ties. And I said, well, how do you make it so that you don't tell your reader too much if they've read it before, or not enough if they haven't read it? And he said something I'll never forget. He said, only tell your reader what they need to know at that particular moment to make sense of the story. Don't tell them a bit more, don't bury them. And what he always does is he asks a question. If you get his book, he'll ask a question, and then about a third of the way through it, he'll answer it. And then he goes ahead and asks another question. Another halfway through, he'll answer it. And it keeps people from shutting the light off at night and reading his books. So that's why I ended up with a series character. And I started out with Zach Kelly and his small team, and I found I really enjoyed them. And I took them through all kinds. I took them to Tibet. I took them to Ireland. I took them to all these different places. But I think the one that I've enjoyed the most is Missing, which is my seventh thriller. And what Missing is, what I try to do, Rick, is I try to take and get some plot lines. And in most of my thrillers, I had two plot lines so I can switch. You know, when a guy's in trouble on one, you switch to the other. But in Missing, we really ended up with 4 plot lines. And the first plot line, and I don't know how many people.
Did you have trouble keeping them straight as you were writing?
Surprisingly, they were different enough. They kind of fell in, but that's a good question. And there were times when it might have been a little difficult. But the first plot line and where the story opens is my Zach goes back because he's been traveling all over the world in the Army. He's never been back to a high school reunion. And most people remember their high school reunion. And this is particularly, now I hadn't been back for 25 years. For Zach, it's 20. And he's trying to remember what his friends were like. And then he's a little anxious, a little curious, trying to figure out, you know, so I started out with Zach, ended up going to his high school reunion. And of course, things happen to Zach at high school reunions that don't normally happen to normal people. And then the second one, and you'll appreciate this one, Rick, as a plot line, is Zach stumbles on a plot by a third-party candidate who uses artificial intelligence to cook the books with state offices to win the presidential election. And I know Kathy was very helpful because that book is timely, and Missing came out about a month ago. And so the timing has been absolutely.
Well, there's been a lot of artificial intelligence in this past presidential election. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I think the intelligence has been artificial in a lot of places. But
Some of it's very, very artificial.
Yes.
And the one other thing, I guess 3 years ago, Elaine and I moved into an over 55 community, and we have attached to our community is a senior center where they take care of people who have memory issues. And they're wonderful. They treat them, but for a thriller writer, as you know, Rick, I always start to what if? What if you have a bunch of people that don't take care of the patients and start abusing or whatever? So that's another plot line. And so what we have is those plot lines, and I'll go ahead and start reading. What I want to
go ahead
do
and start reading. I see Tony has finally joined us there.
welcome.
Tony, you can listen in while Don goes reading on his book.
You made it. Good.
I never cease to amaze myself.
Okay, this is the first, the opening session of Missing. The Calhoun Beach Hotel, Minneapolis, Friday, 4:00 p.m. Zach Kelly stood on the front patio of the Calhoun Beach Club, looking past the noisy rush hour traffic on West Lake Street to the scenic beauty of Lake Calhoun, remembering. He loved the sailboats and the canoes that were framed by the joggers that were circling the shore, beach parties, necking in parked cars around the lake, swimming, water skiing. Zach had enjoyed it all. A mental picture of Bonnie Swenson appeared in his mind when he thought of those fun days. Slender, long blonde hair and blue eyes, a fetching smile which made you wonder what she'd been doing. Had it been 20 years? So long, yet in some ways it seemed like yesterday. What had happened to her? On the drive in from the airport, he passed the house where he'd grown up, then drove around the old high school. He figured she'd at least check it out before the reunion, since it still looked the same, although much smaller than he remembered. And I guess that's what normally happens. Soon after parking his rental car, he found himself on the patio in front of the hotel. Muscle memory had led him there. A voice sounded behind him. Well, my goodness, Zach Kelly, is that really you? Startled, Zach turned to a familiar face. It took a moment for him to recall her name. Jean Edwards. It's great to see you again. Hey, you look terrific. She smiled up at him, sunglasses pushed back in her hair. And that long blonde hair framed her face, and she looked great in her sleeveless, cream-colored party dress, displaying her tanned shoulders. Been a long time, Zach. Where have you been all these years? And whatever happened to that girl? What was her name? Did you ever get married? Well, let's see, Zach said. After a year at the University of Minnesota, I had enough and dropped out. I went in the Army, and I've been there ever since. Married? You were a pretty eligible bachelor, if I remember right. Ellen. Her name was Ellen. Actually, we divorced a year or so ago. She grimaced. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be sorry. I wasn't. How about you? Are you on the market? With you here, I kind of wish I were. She blushed. Guess I shouldn't have said that. I married Freddie Tyson after college, and I became Mrs. Tyson, although I never did the formal Mrs. bit. Wheeler, Dealer, Freddie Tyson. I didn't think you two would ever connect. Well, I didn't think so either, but it's worked out. We've had a couple of kids, and we're still hanging together. What's he doing these days? I always suspected he'd be successful. Oh yeah, he's done very well. He owns a chain of nursing homes. The biggest one is south of Minneapolis in Richfield, not quite out to Interstate 494. Seems to me a good location, Zach said. Probably a primo investment. I'm sure there are lots of seniors around here and more on the way all the time. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Don't you work for some big deal weenie in DC? Zach had to laugh. Well, I'm not sure Admiral Steele would like to be called a big deal weenie, but I guess he is. He's the president's national security advisor. Her eyes widen. Wow, what do you do? Well, the admiral's put together a small group to help him cut through the bureaucracy. Lots of that in DC. And I help out on the group. Jean stopped and looked out at the water for a moment. I guess I'd like to talk to you about these nursing homes. I suspect with Freddie, they're hugely successful. She kept looking at the lake, then back at Zach. They are, but Zach heard a muffled pop, knew that sound from all his overseas, shouted, "Gun!" and turned to pull Jean to the ground. He hit the ground and covered Jean with his body, raised his head to look around. A few startled people looked around, then over at him. "Get down," he called. "It's a gun." They hit the ground. A quick look at her wound told him all he needed to know. She had taken what he thought was a high velocity round right in the forehead, had died instantly. But he checked for a pulse just to make sure. He couldn't believe it. There was none. "Damn it," he muttered. He grabbed his cell and dialed 911. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. That I always remember there's an author here in Northern Kentucky, Jack Curley, who is not real popular in the United States, but he's huge overseas. You walk into any store in Ireland or England, and you're going to see J.A. Curley in the front row of every bookstore. And I asked him one time when I was getting writing, I said, "What's your advice when I start getting into the thriller side?" And he always said to me, he said, "Just make sure of one thing: always keep 2 or 3 extra dead bodies in your back pocket." He said, "Eventually, your editor is going to ask for more dead bodies. Always good to start out with one." You got me going there, got me intrigued, and in the process, you did so well. You did such a good job. You actually got Tony Hylton joining us tonight.
That's right. Just to hear that, that's great. Hi, Tony.
There you go. So you really got it moving there. So with Tony, what we have tonight, and to the folks who are watching at home, we actually, if you think about it, we have this is election night. Don his new book is about use of artificial intelligence to throw elections. Tony, you and I are old enough that we remember how to throw elections the old-fashioned way, right?
Right. Money, and more money.
So Tony comes, I was mentioning it before, Tony comes from a background where he's been in newspaper and journalism all of his life. Tony knows Tony, I ran for Congress in 1998, and I remember walking into a little county down in Kentucky, and the chairman of the bank looked at me and said, "If you want to win this county, I need $5,000 in $5 bills." And I said, "No, thank you." I ended up winning that county without the $5,000. Didn't win Congress, but I won that county. Right. But that's you do it now with artificial intelligence that Don's writing about. But in the old days, it was a little different, right?
Right. In fact, somebody called my book a primer to stealing an election in West Virginia. I had people tell me that.
Well, give us a setup and give us a little taste of what's in Enough.
Okay, Enough is about a small town newspaper publisher that takes on a corrupt political machine in a fictional southern West Virginia county. And as a result,
this wouldn't be autobiographical by any means, would it?
Well, I've been accused of that. But these two political kingpins end up burning the paper to the ground and launching and hatching a plot to murder the publisher on a deserted country road. And he's able to bring the paper back right before a primary, couldn't rebuild the building. And if we've got time, I can read a page and a half if you would like.
That would be great. Why don't you read us a couple pages here and let us know a little feel for the book.
Will do. The 3 vehicles departed Lonsville in different directions. Driving the winding road south along the lake, Rick Hill, the publisher, tensed as he saw headlights fast approaching from behind. 2 vehicles sped by. An older red beat-up pickup truck that, for a reason he couldn't pinpoint, looked familiar. Its bed was filled with old barrels. Following closely was a black 4-door sedan. Their taillights disappeared around the curve on the far side of the lake bridge that connected the sparsely populated Longwood area with the rest of Jordan County. Riding shotgun with Rick was Al's close friend Larry, who had volunteered and brought along his 12 gauge. As they headed up the hill to round the curve just beyond the south end of the bridge, a row of barrels filled with burning logs blocked the road. The obstruction was in a narrow part of the road, so Rick couldn't get around it. There was no one in sight as the publisher brought the van to a stop about 60 feet from the flames. Rick hit the CB button saying, "We've got trouble at the end of the bridge." There was no response. He and Larry slowly got out of the van, guns in hand. 3 men wearing ski masks, carrying long guns and lit up by the flames came around the roadblock. They ordered Rick and Larry to drop their guns. "You just don't learn. We're going to shut you up this time," one of the armed men shouted, the same words used in phone calls to the paper that same afternoon. "Get away from the van," he growled as his round ricocheted off the pavement and hit the van. A 4th man with a gun came out of the shadows behind the roadblock and pointed the gun towards the van. Rick whispered to Larry, "Let's use the van for cover, run back down the highway and try to get in the woods." The 4 masked men started moving around the roadblock towards the van as Rick and Larry moved towards the wood, keeping the van between them and the advancing gunmen. The 4 got around the van and spotted Rick and Larry at the edge of the woods and began firing. Larry got off a couple rounds, sending the gunman back crouching behind the van. "Damn you," one of the gunmen yelled as they resumed firing. Larry and Rick backed deeper in the woods, their eyes never leaving the masked men trying to kill them. A yell sliced through the crisp spring night as a round ricocheted off the pavement and grazed Rick's left leg. He fell against a sturdy pine. Then a bullet ripped into Larry's left arm. He dropped to his knees, but got up and grabbed Rick's jacket, pulled him through a muddy ditch and deeper in the woods. Despite his wound, Rick picked up his shotgun and fired 2 shots toward the advancing masked men. With his good arm, Larry dragged the bleeding, cussing newsman to the cover of 2 towering oaks as bullets ripped through trees on all sides. "I dropped my gun when they hit my arm," Larry whispered. "Hell, I've only got 6 shots left," Rick responded as they watched the 4 men moving towards the woods from behind the van. As the bright moon came from behind the cloud, combining with the flames to illuminate the wood where Rick and Larry were hiding. A screaming siren came from the direction of the bridge. The marauders stopped dead, turned and ran back past the van and the roadblock. One of them tossed a lighted flare through the windshield of the van. Car door slammed and what sounded like 2 vehicles roared off, tires squealing as the van gas tank exploded. "You know him?" the publisher asked Larry. "No, I don't know him, but if I meet him again, I'll recognize their voices." No more were the words out of the mouth than a sheriff's department vehicle, lights flashing and siren blaring, skidded to a halt beside the burning van. After he called for assistance, young deputy, gun drawn, got out of his car and ducked behind a fender. "Over here," Larry yelled as he helped the wounded newsman out of the woods. And the rest of it you can get right here in Enough.
Well, I'm going to mention that while we're on here again. Before I jump into my book, I do want to mention that all of these books are available through Headline Books. Nothing says I love you at Christmas time like an autographed thriller from Headline Books. Now, Tony, let me ask you a question here. I'm always kind of amazed at those of you from the journalism area that are able to change gears and write fiction. And by that, what I mean is you're normally taking quotes from people and writing narrative when you're on the journalistic side. Suddenly you're taking what would be a narrative and turning it into making the story move forward by dialogue. You do an excellent job in this book of doing that. Did you find that difficult to kind of switch the idea of the narrative versus the dialogue?
Well, what happened, I worked on it for probably 15 or 20 years, so I had a lot of time to adjust.
Okay, so you had a little bit of time to do it.
Rick, I'll tell you something that helped me. It's a book by Stephen King called On Writing, and it is excellent. It's like Stephen King is a cheerleader and he wants all writers to succeed. It's completely different than anything he's ever written, but it helped me a great deal to get to that. But between my newspaper years and my novelist years, I was a PR guy in Washington, D.C. for a trade association. So I really didn't go directly from newspaper writing to book.
But I have to say you did a very good job at dialogue. I enjoy the dialogue in this book very much. You did an excellent job with it, and I know for most writers that's one of the difficult things to get used to is how to move a story through dialogue instead of the narrative, and you do a very good job at it. I'm going to jump in. This is the one I normally moderate these things, but I'm going to get to jump in here a little bit myself and talk about my latest book. And my latest book is Opposition Research. So this campaign night. Now, there's when we talk about some of the stuff going on, you'll recognize as someone as an old Politico doing, and I mean with all due respect, we both have the gray hair to choose the word old Politico, but we this is kind of looking at the idea of opposition research, and the one thing that I always like to do in my books is I like to take 2 or 3 bits that are factual and turn them into fiction. Usually it's at the start of the book, sometimes it's in the center of the book, but it always plays this fictional side of this fictional writing of a true story always ends up to be one of the main parts of the book. And this book starts out, as you will remember, in the time frame of writing back in the 70s when there was a lot of mafia wars going on in New York City. And this would be right around the time of Crazy Joe and all the different wars that were going on with the Bonanno family and the things that were happening. Mario Puzo had just written The Godfather. Everything was very recent in that time frame. And so this book starts with the scene in 1976, and we're in Little Italy. And the one thing I was taught when, Don, you mentioned going to Thriller Fest. I can't remember who it was at Thriller Fest, but I remember one of the authors telling me, make sure you write with all 5 senses.
Yeah.
What do you see? What do you feel? What do you hear? The things you miss in this setup is somebody walking down the street in Little Italy and smelling the fresh cannolis, on top of the bubbling blacktop in the middle of the summer. The sound of, when I started writing this book, I never thought, I looked at the date. Of course, it works out just perfectly. Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, Oh What a Night, was #1. In the time frame when this particular scene happened. So everything is kind of, again, what I learned at Thriller Fest, when you and I talked about. And the characters we're talking about here are a young button man named Tony Pagioni, Anthony Tony Pagioni, and the boss that he is protecting, which is Carmine Four Valves Bonomini. and the people who are trying to get back after a 4-year war. There's been a silence after a 4-year war after the Bacino Wars, and this scene takes place outside of a little cafe that actually Kathy and I have been to for dinner one evening outside a little cafe in New York City. And it starts off like this in the about mid-chapter. For a young button man like Anthony Tony Pagione, the deep grudges of a forgotten war meant little, especially when a pretty woman was pressing herself against him, leading against the caddy. His mind raced on their previous encounter. Pagione pulled the woman close and ran his hands down the back of her right thigh. Enthralled by Geraci's body, Pagione was startled when the cafe door flew open. Not immediately seeing Benominy's large figure in the doorway, he slid his hand around Peg's waist. Caught in the act, he swiftly stood up and pushed Geraci backward. "Sorry, Carmine," he stammered. "Are you kidding me?" barked Benominy, waving his arms wildly. Pagione mumbled a couple of unrecognizable words as a response. The pinpoint gaze of Benominy's beady eyes indicated he was not happy. Wobbling on her platform shoes after being pushed away, Geraci grabbed Pagione's arm in an attempt to keep from failing, a move causing Pagione to pull her even closer unintentionally. "Come on, babe," Pagione blurted, trying to free himself from her grasp. His quick motion actually caught on one of the spaghetti straps of Geraci's dress, tearing it loose, the top of her dress sliding down on white strapless bar. "Let go of my arm!" "Mandamus," Benominy snarled, getting madder by the second. "Get a grip on yourself." "Boss," stammered Benominy as if speech was somehow constitute grounds for forgiveness. "Carmine, I. Peg Geraci simultaneously shrugged, trying to maintain her balance and pull the top of her dress over her exposed bra, while her friend Adriana laughed hysterically at the unfolding scene. As Pagione continued to push her away, Geraci actually started to fall, and she once again grabbed his forearm in an uncoordinated ballet of awkward movements. Amid the confusion, Pagione inadvertently stepped backwards off a curb, stumbled a couple of steps toward the street, Geraci following involuntarily behind. Benominy was totally unamused. He stepped down off the sidewalk, reached out, grabbed Pagione's collar with one hand, and slapped him hard with the other, barely missing Geraci, who was still holding on for dear balance and life. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, Benominy caught the movement to his left. He turned, his eyes widened in fear as Nicky and Giorgio Gambattista rounded the corner. Former capos of Bacino, the Gambattista brothers, spent years patiently waiting, plotting their revenge for Bacino's loss of power and death. With anger fueled by adrenaline and cocaine, they strode boldly towards Don Carmine Benominy, their teeth ground tight, their eyes wild. Benominy immediately headed back towards the doorway from which he emerged, seeking shelter inside the cafe, but he was at least 20 feet away. From that position in the street, Pagione could see the two men move quickly towards Don Carmine, their hands emerging from inside their jackets with weapons drawn. The two innocent women flirting with a lowly button man suddenly found themselves in the middle of all hell breaking loose in the middle of Little Italy. As the first shot rang out, Geraci pushed back against Pagione, looking at the face of one Guzman as he fired a bullet into the massive chest of Carmine Benominy. Stunned by the impact of the initial slug, Benominy dropped to his knees, and called out Pagione's name, first in surprise, then in anger. The second shot, right between the eyes, sent the big man sprawling to the pavement. As if it was happening in slow motion, moving towards his boss, Pagione used his left hand to push Geraci out of the way, while going for the weapon inside his suit coat with his right hand. His heart was pounding as the second shooter pulled and put two shots into Pagione's shoulder before he could even reach the sidewalk. The exit wound sprayed blood across Geraci's yellow dress, and one of the bullets grazed her left tricep. "Nicky," Geraci shouted, ignoring people and ducking for cover on the sidewalks. She knew the shooter. "What are you doing?" The gunman looked at her familiar face with a surprised expression. "You shouldn't have said my name, Peg," he muttered, pointing his pistol in her direction. Before he could fire a blast, sent him sprawling backwards. Pajoni was wounded and shaking, but controlled enough to hit the target at close range. He watched as the man spud and then collapsed down the corner panel of the car, hitting the pavement. A trail of blood dripped down the caddy. Pajoni looked at the blood running down Geraci's arm, took a breath, and fell to his knees. The pain was agonizing as he fell his chest first into the street. Rolling and looking towards the sidewalk, he could see a portion of Benominy's body, but the caddy was blocking his view of the man standing over his boss. As Pajoni lapsed from consciousness amid the chaotic characters, he heard the voice of Frankie Valli. I felt a rush like a rolling ball of thunder, spinning my head around and taking my body under. Oh, what a night. And so that leads into many years later when somebody starts doing opposition research on a candidate and this whole incident suddenly comes back into play. And that's kind of the political background of the story. The continuing character, like Don, I have a continuing character. It's Richard Thompson. Richard Thompson, who has been a member of Congress. He has been a member of the United States Senate, and he is now part of a campaign team that does opposition research. And he's doing opposition research, and suddenly this incident starts making its way through his background and through his memory and through what is happening, and that's where the fun starts happening. Now, again, all of these books are available. We got a little bit of time here. All these books are available on Headline Books. Feel free to call them. The Headline Books, actually, even in this time of COVID, we have sent signature cards to Headline Books. If you want an autographed copy, we can get you one of those if you go online onto Headline Books and take a look at that. I've got a question for both of you. This is something that I always love asking a writer, because I think it gives a great insight to how they put pen to paper when they do it. Who's your influence? Who are the influence that you would say influenced you in writing? I'll go first as we're sitting here, and I will say for me it was Tony from the days the great mountain laureate Jesse Stewart. From over across the river from where you were in your newspaper days. Jesse Stewart, I met him when I was 17 years old, and he made me want to write the great American novel. I spent 40 years trying to do it. Finally started writing political thrillers, eventually wrote the great American novel, but also looked to people like Hemingway and to Pat Conroy for some of the inspiration on the literary side. And on the political side, I'm a friend of and one of the guys who actually encouraged me early on to start writing and putting my thoughts on a paper is P.J. O'Rourke, who we had on this Zoom into Books a while back for his latest book, A Cry from the Far Middle. We were able to interview PJ on that one. So those are kind of the influences I have. You'll see a little bit of humor in the books. You'll see a bit of introspection, like you might see from hopefully from a Conroy that I would not dare compare myself to, and a little bit of mountain storytelling, Tony, just like old Jesse Stewart would have done. So Don, who are you? Who would you look to as your influences?
Well, there are a number. I think that when I was at Thriller Fest, there were probably a half a dozen guys that just took their time, not just guys, but ladies who took their time to sit down and try to help. I think that probably one that really influenced me was John Sanford. And John was very easy to talk to. And the thing that I enjoy so much about his books, and he's written like, I think 30 almost now, and he keeps branching out, but he has a tremendous plot, but he has such interesting characters. And if you read his stories, these guys are really funny. They come up with the funniest things. And now he's got another going other than Lucas Davenport. He's got the Virgil Flowers. And very unique. but yet at the same time, they're very careful. I know Sanford was at Thriller Fest, and we had a chance to talk to him and said, you know, you've written 25 novels that have starred Lucas Davenport. And how do you age him? How do you keep him able to do the things that he did? Well, he looked for a minute and kind of rubbed his chin, and he said, you know, I started my first book with Lucas Davenport when I was 42, and Lucas was 42. And then today, after 25, I'm 67, and Lucas is 45. When you're in your 40s, you don't age and you don't change that much. And he made Lucas, he was a hockey player, a tough guy, but at the same time, he was a sharp dresser, had been a computer guy, had sold a company and made a lot of money on it. So I think John Sanford was a real help to me. And as far as the technical side, I guess I've got to go with two guys. One is Donald Moss, and writing the breakout novel. You know, I attended a couple of his seminars, and not only does he have good facts on paper, but he's an interesting storyteller and will kind of help you along the way. And the other guy is James Frye. He's not as well known, but Frye was a professor at University of California in creative writing. And he writes his book, How to Write a Darn Good Novel. And he gives you the fact that with your characters, he said, if you haven't developed a bio on your key characters, which tells you their physical background, their psychological and sociological, you can't really tell your characters. And he uses the example. We are what we grew up in. And he said, you know, you take Barbara Streisand, for example. Let's suppose physically she wasn't able to sing. How would her life change? So you've got to grasp their early lives and what motivates them and share that with the readers. So as a result, it kind of helps them get into the characters and understand them. So I think Sanford and Charles were two terrific helps to me.
Tony, how about you?
It's a conglomeration for me, Rick and Don. I grew up in a newspaper family, and my parents both worked for our local paper in Logan, West Virginia. And so I was around the journalism profession from day one, and had an appreciation for the important role a newspaper could play. Then at West Virginia University School of Journalism, Paul Atkins drilled into us accuracy and fairness. Then I had an uncle that was fortunate enough to work for the Miami Herald and was the official biographer for John Knight at the Knight Ridder newspaper chain. And I just started without having the background in novel writing that you all obviously have developed. I started right after I retired in earnest, and it came together. And the Stephen King book that I got from a friend did a lot, because he had a tip in there, and it fits in with what Don said about having background to your characters. And Stephen King said, you can get to the point where the characters, if you developed them right, can drive the plot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I ended up doing. I just, as I read that piece, my second one, which hope to get published next year, Kathy has said that's going to happen. It will be more tightly written, because this one is not as tightly written. I sort of got enamored with my own words rather than thinking about what the reader was going to have to wade through. So it's a process of learning And this day and age, I think we need to attempt to resurrect community newspapers, particularly in small communities. You can't tell a whole story on the internet. You can tell some of it, but I hope that it has an influence in that regard also.
You know, I've always, you talk about the character development. I've always, and the other question I'd like to hear from both of you is that as when people come to me and say, how do you write a novel? Do I outline it or do I flow with it? And when you say it's not as tightly written, you know, I actually tried one time. My characters will never let me outline. As I tell people, I every time I outline my character to turn to the right, she'll want to turn. She'll see something sparkly over here on the left that attracts her attention. When I finished the book, and it's my favorite story of all the ones that I've done, and it was a book called the Writ of Mandamus, and it was in large part my favorite because most of it took place in Ireland, which my wife and I just love. And I had this scene planned out that was going to take probably 100 pages, where it was going to start at a horse farm in County Mayo, make its way all around the country, get on the barge over to England, and end up in Manchester. They pulled out of the driveway of the farm, made it down to the first stop sign, and by the time they got to the stop sign, everybody was dead. So, you know, it's one of those things. I've never been, you know, I tried to do it like the professionals. I tried to do it like they all said, but truthfully, every time it would something happen, you know, I had my character standing there watching the car coming, and I'm thinking, now why would he follow that car for the next 100 pages? Oh, he's just going to step out right now and take care of it. You know, and it was just one of those things. And my characters have always done stuff to me that I've never expected to happen in the book. And I think, and again, that's why I don't outline. Now you say tightly. I don't think my books are not necessarily tight, but they certainly aren't planned. So you two guys, when you write, do you outline your book? I happen to know where I want the end to be, but I'm not quite sure how my characters are going to get me there. How about you guys?
I'm what they call a pantser, you know, the seat of the pants. I tried to outline a few times, and I just got myself wrapped up in something, and all of a sudden I ended up with this outline. But you know, one of my good friends who I always remember this, he said, I don't outline, but he said, you know, sometimes I'll be sitting there in a chair and I'll be looking off, and my wife will say, what in the world are you doing? And he answers, I'm writing. You know, oftentimes I find out that when I'm working at night, or when I'm sleeping or whatever, when I wake up, I'll be thinking about something, and all of a sudden I'll say, you know, I think that might work. And so we'll put it in. And the other thing, I am a huge fan of critique groups, and I have some wonderful readers. And so as we go along, we'll slip some to these guys, and they'll say, man, that doesn't make any sense. You know, do you really want to do that? So I don't outline, like sit down and write a 30-page outline, but oftentimes I'm doing a lot of that sort of stuff just in my head, thinking about the story and saying, well, maybe let's work this. I don't know. How about you, Tony? What do you do?
Tony came from a career where he had to plan how many words and how many column inches. So let's see where you go. I'm kind of interested to see where you go with this one.
Well, prayer is often the answer, but I will get to a point in the book and write down plot options and go over them and see what directions the characters will go based on what they've done. My second book is a continuation of these bunch of crooked politicians, and the third one is the same thing, and I'm about halfway through that one. But I had a fellow read my book, and it's set in the 1960s. And he said, well, you don't take the reader there. And I thought about that, and I went back and did research, found out how much gasoline was, how much the paper cost, what a pound of meat cost, and all of those things, and then was able to bring those in to take the reader back there, how much a car cost in the 1960s, and was able to do that just, and the fellow that made the suggestions, I've told him since what impact that had, because I was able to take the reader back. But I use those plot options at certain points in the book to see which one will fit the characters the best.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. You know, I think we all find ourselves in that situation. I know the one thing that Don, you were talking about, you know, having the readers, the one of the books I wrote, Manifest Destiny. I was getting tired of writing, and I just finished it too quick, and I gave it to a couple sample readers, and they just ripped me to shreds. They're like, you really got lazy. You got 4 more chapters in here to go. You know, and if you get some good readers in there, and you get somebody who will tell you about changing the price of gasoline and the cost of a newspaper to get you in that scene. I joke when people tell me, how do I become a good writer? I always say, give your manuscript to the church book club. Women sitting around drinking wine and reading the book that you wrote will rip you to shreds. They will not show any mercy whatsoever in what you've done. And they will tell you when they think you've done something wrong. So I think that's a very, you know, from all 3 of our perspectives, is something that we've done of having other people have that influence. We are about down to one more time for question. I'll bring on real quick here. Ashley has been watching us on the sidelines here. Ashley, you've been keeping track of what's going on Facebook and what's going on people logging in. There's Miss Ashley. How are you, dear?
I'm great. You guys are doing such a fabulous job. These are wonderful stories, and we really appreciate all 3 of you being on here this evening. And we do have a comment. So, you know, with the pandemic and everything, everybody's schedules have been much different this year than they have in past years. And people out there want to know, are you working on anything new?
So for me personally, I'm like that dog in the Disney movie that, you know, squirrel. So really, for me to write, I've got to go to some place where there's stuff happening. I mean, you know, when I get into full writing mode, I go to a bar, I go to a coffee shop, I go to all the places I'm not allowed to go to right now. So what I have done is that I have 3 different books that I've started. I'm 3 chapters into 3 different books, and I can't focus on any of them to get into the area that I want to get to. I'm working on a literary fiction book. I'm working on a fly fishing book, and I'm working on the next in the Richard Thompson series. So, and none of them can I get any focus whatsoever to write on, because the bars have got to open back up, Ashley. I can't.
I know, Rick.
I gotta get some. I gotta be in an Irish pub somewhere to write this.
No, I was gonna say you need to go to your Irish pub and get your Guinness and sit there and create.
Oh, don't you know? Yeah. So I'm thinking a lot about writing. I've 3, like I said, I'm 3 chapters into 3 different books, but I'm having trouble pushing the plot forward just in the process of because of the isolation, because being quarantined and everything that's going on with the pandemic with our family personally.
Right. Well, at least you have something started. That's
right.
You know, a step in the right direction. What about you, Don? Anything new that you're working on?
Kathy and I have teamed up to do an anthology, and we call it the Voices from the Pandemic. And I just happen to have a cover of the book right here. And what we've done is we taught workshop on how to write a memoir. And then we've got 32 people who have written wonderful memoirs. They range all the way from healthcare workers to educators. And basically we asked them to take the period 1 January to 30 June, and tell about what happened. And this afternoon, we had Joel Coleman, who, as you all know, is that wonderful singer from the Platters. And we had Dreama Denver, and talked about the pandemic book. And one of the things that eventually I need to get out and talk to is we got, Kathy was able to come up with a teacher, I think it was a social studies assignment, and they wrote, and these were all sixth graders, and they wrote about what their experiences with the pandemic. And I'll tell you, these guys are worth listening to. These are some great. So I think that, and we're so proud of the fact that it got an honorable mention at the New York Book Festival, and it's very high on the Amazon list of diaries and books. So we're proud of it, and we're going to keep working with it.
Absolutely. Yes. Congratulations on all that success. That Kathy Cheats has a good idea every now and then.
She does. And once she puts you to work, I mean, she works you.
Oh, don't I know it? Story of my life.
Give me a break.
I know. It's tough. Tough crowd. What about you, Tony? Anything new in the works?
Well, I had, before the pandemic started, I worked for the Morgantown Convention and Visitors Bureau. They get their money from people staying in hotels, so don't have to tell you where that went. And I had about 20,000 words done on my second book back in the first part of April, and just caught fire and got it to about 75 or 80,000. And then have got about 35 or 40,000 done on the third book. And I was just able to get up and concentrate and hit it for an hour or two, and sometimes 3 or 4. And it just sort of opened my mind up, and I was able to concentrate more on it. And I guess that sort of fits into Don's what you did during the pandemic. And so that's what I've been. One thing I wanted to say to Rick is I think Jesse Stewart had a daughter named Jane, and I think she might have married the son of my high school principal, Julian Juergensmeyer. So
Is that right? Well, that's the old man was the one that got me interested in writing when I was 17 years old in high school, and one of my most cherished possessions is not only an autographed copy of one of Jesse's books, but he gave me the handwritten notes to his speech that he gave on the day that I met him, and so they sit proudly just to the right of me in my bookcase. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Tony, thank you. Don, thank you. Ashley, thank you. We want to remind everybody this is the holiday extravaganza. Nothing says I love you like an autographed book from Headline Books. And we can get you not only that book, but we can get it autographed because we sent these little placards in during this COVID time frame that we can paste right in the book for you to give to someone for the holidays. Can't get them that way. They're also available on Amazon. Get them through your local bookstores, but buy these books. Peace, love, and read something well over the holidays.